Today we're here with John Bussian, who's a First Amendment and North Carolina Press Association attorney about some First Amendment issues. And John, I believe you want to talk about some recent developments maybe in North Carolina law and some other things as well.
Well, in particular, as an outgrowth of litigating First Amendment issues, we find ourselves engaged in talking to sitting lawmakers in the North Carolina General Assembly. So in 2013, there are a number of front burner issues facing the broader advertising industry, since so many press interests are tied to advertising fortunes, whether they're good or bad these days.
And what are some of these developments?
Well, in particular, the General Assembly is poised to launch massive tax reform at the state level. And it's been discussed for years that the economy in this state has evolved from a manufacturing-based economy where the sales tax would work well, taxing the sale of goods when those goods reach the consumer, to a services-based economy. So the idea here is to replace gradually the sales tax on the sale of goods with a sales tax essentially on services.
And they're not only talking about doing this for advertising, but also other things like legal services and even going to the barbershop or auto mechanic.
Accountants, lawyers, all of it.
Everything. Okay.
As it would affect us, though, and lots of clients of ours, advertising is the big threat right now. And why would that be unusually important? Well, in terms of free press rights, a tax on advertising was long ago found by the U.S. Supreme Court to be one of the things that imperils free press rights, because governments over time historically have used two things to restrict the press. One is censorship, and the other one's taxation.
What is that saying? The power to tax is the power to destroy? That's
right, essentially. Well, when it comes to a free press, it's especially true. So that, the industry is not immune from taxation. Broadcast and print interests have long paid corporate income tax. But historically in this state, the press has been exempt. The newspaper industry in particular has been exempt from sales tax, at least in 95% of the current applications. So that's a recognition. I would suggest that the state constitution offers protection against undue tax burdens that don't exist even at the federal level. And it's been an important tradition here, and it's one that we hope this General Assembly would see fit to preserve. So there will be a long conversation, I think, and plenty of lobbying to be done to try to protect the free press rights at stake in the new services tax proposal.
And when you're talking about the services tax, and I've heard a little bit about it, the proposal is to replace the state income tax with a new, I guess, higher sales tax on regular goods, and then a new service tax. Is that what you're understanding?
Well, I think broadly, I think the General Assembly and the new Republican leadership want to have the tax reform be revenue neutral, so that whatever you're feeling now, if you're a business operator or you're a publisher or a broadcaster, would be less under the new proposal. So that in particular they're talking about eliminating personal income tax, they're talking about eliminating corporate income tax, replacing it with a real estate transaction tax, and this services tax we're talking about that they're suggesting now would start at 8% on the services affected, and right now they're not talking about exempting anybody. So that's a pretty big tax reform proposal, and we plan to be out there in the middle of the discussion and vigorously protect the interests of the press, at least, that are at stake, more broadly the advertising industry across the board.
One thing I haven't heard actually mentioned in seems like any of the discussion is not just the tax itself, but you're talking about adding to newspapers and other businesses, I guess the cost of, collecting the tax, reporting it, in other words, you have an accounting function there that you didn't have before. Is there any estimate on, would the potential savings by eliminating the corporate income tax or personal income tax be overcome by the cost of the service tax plus the cost to administer it? In other words, for a business who didn't have to send in stuff to the State Department of Revenue before, now you do, that's added burden.
Sure, I think it might even be simpler than that. I just think that depending on what business you're in, to suggest that the new services tax at 8%, 9%, or 10% would somehow be less than your current tax on the profits from your business at the corporate level may be a stretch.
Right.
I mean, certainly for a lot of newspaper publishers today, the net effect is likely to be worse under a services tax scenario. Again, depending what the rates are ultimately imposed. So I think there's that, and then the other thing that the General Assembly is facing this year is we would hope a return to improving open government law in the state. You've heard me say before that North Carolina is probably in the bottom 10% of states allowing meaningful access to public records. Some headway's been made in recent years, but we've still got a long way to go. And 2 years ago, a bill came through to open up public personnel records in a meaningful way for the first time in the history of the state. And it was torpedoed near the end by public sector interest groups.
And we've seen some recent examples of that where News Observer had to kind of dig deep to find out what former First Lady Mary Easley was getting paid as far as her pension and that sort of thing.
Right, so the bill in 2011 was designed to open up access to something as simple as how much do we pay government employees.
Right.
You would think that that's an article of faith, and it is in most other states. We succeeded in getting some better access to compensation records, but left unattended is the broad secrecy that currently attends other records of government personnel performance, hiring, and firing. The leading states in the country, Florida, Texas, Ohio, to name three, have close to unfettered public access rights to those materials.
In other words, that's the standard practice in other states. It's not like you're asking for anything new.
I think in at least 25 other states, there is generally open access to public personnel records, and we don't have much at all in North Carolina.
And in terms of execution of current North Carolina law, it seems like there's the law, and then there's sometimes what people's understanding of the law is that part of the problem as well. In other words, if someone requests a public document and public officials don't turn it over in a timely manner or as they should, is that something that needs to be addressed, or is it just a matter of changing the law?
Well, I think it's a matter of changing the perception of the judiciary toward open government law generally. And this came up in the campaigns for statewide judicial offices this last election cycle, 2012. We had a justice for the Supreme Court seat open, and there were 2 candidates for that job, and there were also 3 seats on the North Carolina Court of Appeals open. And one of the things that we tried to help voters understand, we, the media broadly, is that whoever you put in these jobs will ultimately have the task of interpreting open government law. And the key to all of that is when there's a doubt, these judges are supposed to interpret the laws in favor of public access. So the tie goes to the public. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, and historically, as you know, Randall, Too many times government officials do just the opposite, and then when those cases get to court, the judges sometimes rubber stamp what government officials do to make records secret, to close meetings to the public. So the good news is a couple of judges in particular who were elected statewide this time are known to be true to the cause of open government, and I think that gives the public and the press in this state cause for hope. And in time, we may see better interpretations favoring public access by the courts.
Well, especially when budgets are tight and people want to know where their money's being spent and that sort of thing. Seems like it would be, better to have open.
Now more than ever,
Yeah,
Randall.
yeah, exactly. One last question. It's the early part of 2013 where we're shooting this video. What is the timeline for the legislature, and when do you expect some of these changes in the state legislature to take place?
Well, so 2013 should be a very active session at the state legislature, and I would imagine that by the time they project adjourning in June or July, we will have seen some action on both fronts.
So pretty quickly.
Both with taxation and with open government. So sometime in the next 6 months.
And do you think the taxation proposal has steam to it, or is it just something that was kind of mentioned in some political campaigns, that sort of thing?
No, I think everybody from the governor to the leaders in both the Senate and the House are committed to opening the discussion. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there will be bills that will be unveiled sometime by the end of January. So the debate will be on. And so I don't think it's idle chatter at all. I think these are real issues, and they merit some serious discussion because, as we've just discussed, they implicate, among other things, free press rights at the end of the day.
And even if it's not passed this time, it could be, the door could be open for future sessions, and might change later on.
Absolutely. So since our legislature runs in 2-year cycles, these issues will be alive whether they pass this time or not.
Well, it sounds interesting, John. I appreciate you talking with us, and we look forward to hearing more about it from you. Thanks a lot.
Randall.
Okay, thank you, John.